Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live after a thrilling and almost not thrilling Chargers win over the Cincinnati Bengals. The Chargers are officially 7-3, and they are full steam ahead towards the playoff picture. So very excited to dive into all of it tonight. Obviously, Tyler is unable to make it. Tyler attended the game in person. So for all of you who were trying to ban Tyler from attending SoFi, they won a big game for the first time in a long time for him. So joining me in his place is Alex Katzen, our guy who does not bull breakdowns. That's the other Alex, excuse me. Katzen's Corner, Alex, every single week for draft perspective. Alex, what's up, man? How you doing tonight?
Doing good, got out of there alive, if only barely, just like the Chargers. But happy about the win. Now 2-0 when scheduled to be on the postgame show for me. So feel good about that, And yeah, lots to take away from this game, obviously.
Yeah, I don't know really where you wanted to start, but Tyler jumping in on the chat, I love to see it. He can attend games. Woo, yes. Tyler had hopefully that game was not as stressful in the stands as it was watching it on TV. I feel like that game took like 5 years off my life, just with like all the ups and downs and everything like that. Um, Alex and I were chatting a bit before we jumped on, and when Justin Herbert fumbled that on that scramble, I was like, oh, okay, so this game's over. Like we've seen this script several times over, right? And the offense completely disappears in the second half. But when Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey needed to make plays, they were able to do it. And Ladd, 6 catches, 123 yards, establishing himself. Obviously, we've known this for some time that he is Justin's wide receiver one, but for him to be the guy that Justin goes to in the clutch, I think speaks volumes to where that connection is at. And then J.K. Dobbins seals it off with a touchdown. So the Chargers, they almost chargered, and then they didn't. And Ladd McConkey, Justin Herbert, J.K. Dobbins deserve a ton of credit for saving that game in the fourth quarter and pulling out a Chargers victory over the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Ladd McConkey sort of continued sustained breakout is certainly going to be the lasting story of this game, just off that final drive and everything. And really, I mean, I think that goes along with the fact that like he left this game earlier, like really early in the first quarter. He was only out for a little bit, but like he did like go back to the locker room and then come back, like a drive later with a shoulder injury. And so was obviously, you would assume probably pushing through some stuff in order to perform as he did in this game. And so huge performance from him. We'll get into the Justin Herbert performance, I'm sure, but I thought the first half was one of the best halves of football I've ever seen him play, which is obviously a super high bar for a guy like Justin. And yeah, they like this is the kind of win that the Chargers needed to get with Jim Harbaugh as the head coach. Like this is the kind of win that great teams get, right? Where even if you jump out to a huge lead and you kind of blow it, like you talked about, Steven, with in the third quarter there's 4, 5, 10 plays that the Chargers make or don't make where every fan that's been watching this team for a long enough time is like, oh yeah, we're losing this game, we've lost, like there's no way this is happening. And the great teams come back and they win those games through that sort of adversity. Cam Hart missed basically the entire second half, if not more than that, I think. No Khalil Mack, Ladd McConkey's pushing through this shoulder injury, all sorts of stuff going on with this team. And they pushed through and they got the win against a Bengals team that is much better than this 4-7 record that they have now.
Yeah.
And so it's a huge win for them. I think that it ultimately makes you feel, once you come down from sort of the emotional roller coaster of the game itself, I think you feel really good about where the Chargers are at going forward and potentially going into the playoffs, having to battle with the cream of the crop in the AFC, because now we've seen them do it at least the one time, right? We've seen them sort of battle back and fight their way back into a game and get a win like this that isn't necessarily the prettiest, but a win is a win.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The culture buzzword has been thrown around a whole lot, and then we're seeing a lot of dividends with the way that Jim Harbaugh is coaching this football team. Beating teams that they should beat is a new thing for us, and winning a game like this is a new thing for us. And like, there's so many moments in this game where previous Chargers teams wilt under those moments. You know, the roughing the passer penalty from Otito Ogbonia, which I caught some heat on Twitter for saying it was the correct call. And in 10 years ago football, yeah, that's not a roughing the passer penalty, but Otito lifts him, he drives him into the ground and makes contact with Joe Burrow's chin area. In today's NFL, that's a penalty 10 times out of 10, and how the referees are instructed to enforce the penalty. It wiped off an interception, and the Bengals did end up scoring on that drive, but those are situations where the Chargers have continued to lose games in the past when those moments happen, right? And you can obviously point to the Rashawn Slater holding call as well as a moment, which again it did force them to punt on that drive, but then they come back afterwards and they're able to get back into it and win the game. So we hadn't really seen the Chargers be truly tested like this kind of moment in a clutch situation, and they definitely caught some breaks. The Bengals caught some breaks to get back into it. It was kind of a back and forth, fourth quarter in that regard. But for the Chargers to come out on the other side in a positive outcome here, I think will only give them some confidence, right? And Joey talked about this last 2 off seasons ago, where like there's just been so many moments in his tenure with the Chargers where they blow these leads, they don't really know how to like perform in these games. There's just kind of an avalanche kind of feeling that comes across the team, and so for them to have this kind of game and win it, I think is going to do some really positive things for the mentality of this team going forward and going up against these better teams that they have over the next 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, definitely. I think you think about, the way that the players sort of talked about after the Jaguars playoff loss, right? That
Yes.
there were all of those games in the season that followed that where it just felt like the Chargers had that in their head the whole time, and they had in their head that like it was going to happen to them again, and it was going to happen to them again, and like as much as like that happens to us as fans, right, that happens to the players too, right, because they're people as well. They went through it, they went through that whole experience, they were in the stadium, on the field when that game happened, and so that comes into your mind, right, every time that you play a game like this. And there was a distinct lack of confidence that the Chargers had when they got into those situations over the last year and a half, 2 years, because of that Jaguars game. And most of the players from those teams are still the main players on this Chargers.
The core is still from that game, yeah.
Right. Like the core is still the same from that game. And so I think to get a win like this, and especially with like all the young guys that you have playing, like with Quinton and Ladd and the corners that you have out there, like, the new pieces are not like all veteran free agents that you brought over. It's a lot of the same core from that Jaguars loss, plus some rookies and some young guys that are stepping up and contributing that have also never been a part of a win like that. And so I think to get one like that kind of turns that tide. And I think you see the confidence growing for this Chargers team of like, okay, that's a game that we can go out and win. Like they interviewed Justin post game on the field, and they asked him, what did you guys do in the second half? How did you have to like battle back and do it? And he just said, we just had to be patient, right? Like some of the things didn't go our way in the third, fourth quarter. That's goes sometimes. And we just had to be patient, know that we had the right guys on the field, and, get through it. And I think that mentality and that sort of like confidence in like, we have the right set of guys on the field, we have the right 11 on offense, the right 11 on defense, that like we're going to be able to get back into this game and we can hang with anybody. I think that is like the main takeaway that I have from this game, is that like this Chargers team is getting closer and closer to being able to hang with those teams.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And like you mentioned, this is a Bengals team that is much better. And we saw the talent, right? This was a matchup that a lot of people were concerned about from the Chargers secondary perspective. And Christian Fulton left for a little bit again, which is definitely a concern. Cam Hart leaves. Eli Apple's playing out there. Jasir Taylor's playing on the outside versus T. Higgins. And so it wasn't the cleanest game from the defense. Obviously, 27 points is the most that they've given up this season. And they allowed 21 points in the second half, which is just that individually is the most they've allowed in the season. So for them to kind of be able to rally in those moments, and again, they got some help, but I think you saw some players step up in those moments that I think can really continue to build their confidence. Christian Fulton had a couple of key pass breakups. Tariq still had a pass breakup that was crucial. Tuli Tuipulotu was fantastic tonight. He was all over the field. The initial grades from PFF have him with 7 pressures. I think it's going to end up being a lot more than that. He hit Joe Burrow at least 6 times today from what I saw. So these younger players who haven't been around and are trying to learn from these vets, trying to learn from Khalil, trying to learn from everybody else, and coming up with these key plays in the second half is super important for where this team is at. And you know, who knows how this game would have gone if Khalil were able to play. I think it would have changed quite a lot, honestly, given how the Bengals offensive line was performing. But they took the Bengals' best punches, man. I mean, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins made some incredible plays. Joe Burrow was fantastic at escaping some of the pressure. And so I just think, like, we're talking a lot about some buzzwords here, but I think truly this can set the tone for a end of the season for the Chargers that can be really, really positive. They're not going to win every single game, but for them to overcome what they overcame tonight, I think is huge for this team, the young players, the culture that they're all building, and just continue to stack positive momentum for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point defensively that Tuli was phenomenal. I mean, like that is, I hate to keep saying, it's one of the best games that I've seen from a player right on this team, but like that is one of the best games I've seen him play. And he's been on a tear for the last, month at this point where
Yeah.
I think you feel really good about him, with obviously the situation with both Khalil and with Joey is sort of in flux after this year with Khalil hitting free agency and Joey's injury history kind of being what it is. Right. And so I think you're at a point now where you can feel really good about him. And I thought Deion Henley was fantastic as well defensively.
Yep.
And that came up huge for them at the end of the game because Denzel Perryman gets injured. I think it was towards the beginning of the fourth quarter, maybe the end of the third quarter. It looked like he just kind of got tripped up. Maybe, it seemed like maybe it was a leg injury type thing, but he wasn't out there at the end of the game. It was Henley and Troy Dye. And there's so many of those throws where Burrow is trying to check it down to Chase Brown and try to just get a couple of yards and keep the Bengals offense moving a little bit. And Henley is just like there immediately on all of those, like driving on those so quickly.
Yeah.
His development has been a real huge key for the Chargers defense, I think. And then obviously the secondary guys have continued to play well. I think that there's assuming that he clears protocol and he's going to be good to go and everything, there's really no reason in my mind at this point why Cam Hart shouldn't be starting the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Because he's been fantastic. I mean, like he was going one-on-one with Jamar Chase for the first, quarter and a half of the game and like taking his, like they were going 50-50 on those throws. And you don't expect that of a 5th round rookie against one of the best receivers in the league. Right. And so, I thought Fulton was a little bit up and down. You kind of expect that in a guy's first game back from injury. He's been out for 3 or 4 weeks at this point. Was a little bit grabby. I think was maybe just not trusting the hamstring totally, and so started to get beat a little bit and then just grab. That's something that I think will come along. I'm not super concerned about that. And then to have Tariq still have to come in the game basically once Hart was concussed and play on the outside, play in the slot a little bit when they move Jaw to the outside and perform well in that role after starting for the last 3 weeks. It's easy to kind of get out of that rhythm of being a guy that has to come off the bench when you start for a couple of games. And so, I thought he was really impressive. I think you feel really good about where the pieces are at on this Chargers defense and the fact that they continue to get this exposure. And like we talked about all week, in everything that we've made and, the live streams that you and Tyler have done leading up to this game, all the articles that I've written for Chargers Wire leading up to this game, that like this Bengals offense is the best offense they've played all year.
Yeah.
And it was going to be the biggest test. And I wasn't necessarily expecting that they were going to hold them to 13 points because the offense has been on fire. They've scored 30 or more points in half their games this year.
Right.
And so for them to perform the way that they did and fight through the adversity the way that they did, I thought was really impressive, especially without a guy like Khalil out there to kind of like anchor the ship, so to speak. I think that there's a lot of optimism, even with giving up the 27 points and giving up the 21 points in the second half. I think that there is a lot of optimism to be had about this Chargers defense. Obviously, we'll see if that carries over next week with the top offense in the league.
Different beast.
SoFi Stadium on Monday night. That's going to be completely different. There's going to be, a million different things that they're going to have to do with just the way that Lamar Jackson's dual threat ability changes the calculus.
Yeah.
But I think that you feel pretty good about where they're at, even with this sort of like aberration of a performance scoring wise.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that they kind of adjusted on the fly with Dayon, kind of spying Joe Burrow a bit, I think is obviously going to be a very crucial thing for them going forward. Lamar Jackson is a different animal in space, right? But with Dayon and Derwin, I do feel like the Chargers have some potential answers there. And then we've seen some moments where the Chargers' rush lane integrity has been really solid against mobile quarterbacks. Obviously, I think the Mahomes game earlier this season was kind of the main aspect there. But you mentioned Cam Hart, and we've been so impressed with him. We both loved him coming out of the draft, and Tyler did as well. And him going out with a concussion, it drastically changed the game. Like it was the concussion, and then the following drive was when T. Higgins beat Jasir Taylor deep, and then the Bengals are right back into it. And Jasir Taylor against T. Higgins is not a matchup I feel comfortable with at any moment. Jasir in the slot, I think, is generally like a solid player, right? But him against T. Higgins versus Cam Hart against T. Higgins or Christian Fulton against T. Higgins, it's just different. And so, the Chargers being able to overcome these injuries, overcome the second half lapses, I'm just really excited to see what this looks like, because as cheesy as it sounds, you have to learn how to win in these games. You do. This is not just something that you can just figure out and just start winning. So I think that is only going to propel the Chargers going forward. Let's talk about the offense next. You mentioned it. Tale of two halves. I guess we'll start with a positive. That was probably the best half of football I've ever seen Justin Herbert play. And we've seen some crazy halves of football of Justin Herbert. I mean, the scrambling, the throw to Will Dissly was outstanding. The touchdown to Quentin Johnson was outstanding. We saw both sides of that coin, but I think you see when the Chargers offense can stay in rhythm like they did in the first half, this can be a top half of the league offense or top half of the league offense, just with everything that Justin Herbert is able to do. Unfortunately, we did see the end of that, but from a first half perspective, Justin played about as good of a first half as I think you could have possibly done in that kind of situation. Will Dissly officially has a career high in yards in week 11. The former, obviously, Washington Husky blocking tight end in Seattle, having a career high in yards in week 11 is kind of crazy, but that's where this roster is at. And Justin Herbert was just slinging the ball in the first half. He was unconscious in the first half. They have to do a much better job going forward to find a way to be consistent across 4 quarters. But Justin has shown again on prime time when he's at his best, man, like he is one of the 3 best quarterbacks in the league.
Yeah. I mean, simply put, he was dealing in the first half. He was, like you said, he was unconscious. It was ridiculous. I was speechless in my room watching the game. Like, it was insane. I believe at halftime he had an EPA per play of 0.8, which means that every 5 plays he was generating a point of offense, which is insane. Like, the best quarterbacks in the league on like a season basis average like 0.2 maybe.
Yeah.
And so, obviously it's a much smaller sample, but like it was a ridiculous first half. Exactly, Trevor. It was a spiritual experience. It was one of the greatest things I've ever seen on a football field. I think at this point. The second half, I think there's a lot to unpack there, right? Because some of it was just Herbert was not in a rhythm in the second half. And I don't know why exactly that is, but there were a couple throws that he just missed. Obviously, that throw to Ladd towards the end of the fourth quarter, where it was just a little bit high and Ladd was open, like that one's just a miss. There were a couple other ones where they were just misses. Obviously delivers on that final drive, and so you kind of memory hole some of those throws, but there were a couple that I think that he just wasn't seeing right. A couple that just kind of didn't go his way. But then also I thought that the game plan that they came out with in the second half was just really confusing to me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it just sort of went like it didn't feel like they were continuing to hit the things that were working in the first half, right? Like in the first half, they didn't get a deep ball down the sideline to Quentin Johnston.
Yeah.
They didn't really attempt one even, right? They're trying to work the middle of the field, they're working the seams. Like Herbert is rolling out and he's hitting throws kind of when he gets out of structure a little bit. And they kept trying to go back to this go route down the sideline to Johnston
Yeah.
in the second half.
Yeah.
And I know that people are going to have all of their takes about Quentin, right, on some of those plays. And I do think that some of those fell on him a little bit. I think that there were a couple where you want to see him make a contested catch like that, where there's one that kind of hit him right in the hands, right in the chest, and the DB does get a hand on it, but it's kind of bouncing around like right in the breadbasket for him. And, that's a catch you'd like to see him come down with. I know the one that came out of his hands and landed in bounds. I think he
Oh,
just didn't see where the ball went, you know,
yeah.
on that one. And so that's kind of another tough one where it's like you'd love to see him make an adjustment to that ball and make a catch. But like if he makes that play, it's an outstanding play, like
Yeah.
on both of those, right? And so like I get that like we're spoiled as Chargers fans because we had Mike Williams for almost a decade making those
Right.
plays. But like those plays are not normal. And
Yeah.
so if you get those, it's a bonus, right? But also like from a game planning perspective, from a like strategy perspective, they kept trying to go back to this and the Bengals had DJ Turner on him the entire second half, who runs a 4.28. And so like you're like I get you want to try to get Johnston vertically stretching the field and get him down the field, but like he's not gonna create separation on a corner like that when it's just a straight go ball every time.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
Turner is plenty fast enough to hang with him on those plays, and you saw that like he was able to hang with him and make those plays, and they just kept going back to it. And it goes back to something that we talked about last year with Quentin, which is that like that's not really his ideal role.
No.
That's not what you want him to be doing. You want to be getting the ball to him underneath and letting him work after the catch.
Yeah.
And they keep kind of putting him in these situations where they're asking him to be a jump ball receiver. And that's not really his skill set, even though it seems like it should be because of his size. And so that was sort of confusing to me. I didn't really understand why they didn't try to get the run game going a little bit more.
Yeah.
Up 27-6 to start the second half. Obviously, it was a slog on the ground. If you take out that JK run at the end of the game, both Dobbins and Edwards were, I think, at 27 yards apiece. Yeah. JK
Yeah.
on 10 carries, Gus on 6. And so, it really wasn't going super well on there, from that respect. But you still like if you're up 21 points at halftime, you need to like try to get that going as much as you can. And it's something that we've talked about a couple of times. Like this Bengals run defense isn't good. They came into the week 30th in the league in
Yeah.
pretty much every statistic. We've seen this throughout the season. They didn't run well against the Cardinals, who were a bad run defense. They didn't run well against the Browns, who are a bad run defense. Like they've struggled to find a rhythm on the ground, and I thought that they had kind of found a little bit of something last week with
Same.
us coming back and breaking off some of those runs where it seemed like they felt more comfortable with those two guys out there and having them both be in a rhythm. And then they only played Gus 11 snaps this week. I don't know if like the ankle injury played a part in that, if he was just a little bit more limited than he was last week. I know he tweaked it a little bit against Tennessee last week. And so
Yeah.
I don't know if that played into it or what it was, but like JK played 49 snaps and Gus played 11. And so, like again, you're kind of like relying on JK to carry the run game. And like it just, they haven't been able to get into a rhythm for whatever reason. And I thought that that was kind of disappointing to see them not try to commit harder to getting that into a rhythm when you had a little bit of space to operate as far as like scoreboard margin to try to make that work a little bit more and try to see if they could find something different and pull out some new concepts and pull out some new looks because I think that a lot of the stuff with the run game has just gotten a little bit stale over the last few weeks. And so it's been a little tough, but I think that it's overall, it's up and down second half. It's a good Bengals team. I'm not like super concerned about it in general, but I'm, you know, there's optimism to be had. But I think the second half, you definitely have some concerns.
Yeah, it was confusing. It felt like they were operating as if they were the team down 27-6. It was a lot more 11 personnel. It was a lot more like traditional shotgun passing concepts. Whereas in the first half, what was working the most was they would get in, the two tight end sets, and it was play action. And you see the Bengals linebackers were just like flowing hard to the football, and that's part of the reason why I think they weren't able to run the football in general, is that the Bengals were definitely ready for the kind of stuff that they were able to do. So the run game, I think it just kind of has to continue to evolve. This is the second game where Gus Edwards is back. I didn't realize it was 11 snaps, but I was surprised to see the lack of intentionality with the run game in the second half, because they were in this kind of game script where, okay, like this is a group that's going to want to get after it. And like the end of the first half sequence where the Chargers are in a wing T formation, I was like, okay, like they're just going to pound the rock the rest of the game and try and get out of here. And then they didn't do that. It was a lot of 11 personnel, shotgun passing concepts, and Justin did not have his best in the second half. It felt like, Quentin had a couple of the drops. It felt like Josh Palmer had a drop. Will Disley had a drop. So it was a lot of confusion, I think, just of the general approach in the second half. So, hopefully this is a group again that can just continue to figure things out a bit, and we'll see what happens. The Quentin discourse is not going to be fun. Like you mentioned, it was a lot of last year Quentin Johnston, when this season he's at his best when he's been able to work diagonally or horizontally across the formation. And there is part of it where you want to see him continue to evolve and improve as a player, and he's drastically improved from year one to year two. So I can kind of understand giving him some opportunities out there on the perimeter, but he has 8 targets, and I think 5 of them were gone go balls. That's not the ideal way to use Quentin Johnston. But overall, he's improved a lot, and he's a functional, reliable, for the most part, NFL wide receiver, which is a huge step up from last season. But this offense is going to run through Ladd and Will Disley apparently for the rest of the season going forward. Again, Ladd just had his best when the Chargers needed it. He, gets the injury and comes back, but he's just able to do so much against man coverage. And that was also, I think, the Bengals deserve some credit. They played a lot more zone in the second half, which I think kind of threw the Chargers off a little bit. Whereas in the first half, they played a lot of man coverage that led to Herbert scrambling. It led to Ladd's ability to separate. I hope these teams continue to play man coverage against Ladd McConkey, because he's just dusting these slot corners, man. I mean, Mike Hilton is a legitimately good slot corner. We saw it a couple weeks ago. Me and you talked about it versus Alontae Taylor. Like he's I don't know if like physically he'll ever have like true like wide receiver one in the league upside, but for this team, he's kind of the perfect wide receiver one. He can do a lot of vertical stuff. He can do all the short stuff. He blocks his butt off. So it just, it continues to improve what he's able to do as a rookie against man coverage. So it's been a treat to watch Ladd play. The receiver room is obviously not perfect. It was a rough Palmer game. It was a rough Quentin game. But overall, those guys have been pretty solid this year, and I expect them to play better next week against the Bengals defense is not great, but the Ravens defense is arguably worse. So it should be interesting to see how this team responds next week against the Ravens in the Harbaugh Bowl on Monday Night Football.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great point about Ladd. Like the stuff against man coverage has been incredible. And when he's coming out of the draft, that was sort of the book on him, right? Is that like this guy's going to be a productive NFL wide receiver from the jump, because his route running ability is such that like he can just beat slot corners. Like he's going to win those matchups. And I don't necessarily think that any of us thought that he was going to win those matchups against guys like Alontae Taylor and Mike Hilton right away. But the fact that he's able to has been a huge boost for this Chargers offense because, again, like to not to continue the discourse about the whole room, but like there isn't a great number one option that has
Sure.
emerged right outside of Lad, and so the offense has to run through somebody, right? And we've seen it run through Will Dissly, and that's been cool, but it's also like that's not going to be sustainable forever, right? And so to have a guy like that that you can trust that you're going to, if you get a man coverage look, he's going to win that and you're going to be able to throw him the ball on that look, I think has been huge for the Chargers, and I think has obviously been huge for Justin kind of developing that trust with him.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I mentioned this, but Will Dissly, it's just so funny to me to see this box score. Will Dissly, 4 catches, 80 yards, 6 targets. He did have the one drop, but that touchdown catch was it was great design, great throw from Justin. 2 catches for Quentin, 2 catches for Palmer. This has kind of been the recipe again. Quentin 8 targets. You would obviously hope to have that, be able to go forward. But the last thing about the offense that I think is worth pointing out, at least before we get into some of these other questions and stuff like that, but the Chargers only had the ball for 25 minutes. This is a game script that should have been very, very positive for them. But to have that limited amount of possessions and 3 and outs, it really did not create an opportunity for the offense to get into a rhythm. They had a 3 and out to start the second half, and then they had the field goal, and then a 3 and out, and then Justin's fumble, and then a 4 and out, a 3 and out, a 3 and out, and then the touchdown to win the game. So the offense in the second half has continued to be kind of a challenge. Again, they had their best when they needed it, but this kind of game script should have been more conducive towards what the Chargers usually prefer on offense, and it just was. They were not able to get anything really going in the second half until the very end, obviously. So a very up and down performance from the offense. Part of that is just the roster. Part of that is what the Bengals adjustments are doing and deserve credit. But they've got to continue to find ways to be more consistent in the second half, especially in games where you're not able to jump out to a 27-6 lead.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of dismissed the Bengals defense because they haven't really performed well this season, but like Lou Anarumo is still one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. And
100%.
So for them to come out with the adjustments that they did in the second half and kind of limit what the Chargers were able to do, I don't think is necessarily a surprise, right? I don't think that like it's all on the execution of the Chargers offense, or it's all on the game plan, like we talked about a little bit earlier, right? Like there was also just some of it was just the Bengals executed better, right? And I think that's to be expected when you go against a coordinator like that. And so again, like there's some stuff that you would like to see get cleaned up for sure from the Charger side, but I think overall you feel pretty okay given the state of the roster and everything.
Yeah. I lied. One more thing. I think we do have to talk about the offensive line.
Yeah.
We'll see what the film looks like. The run game certainly did not seem too great. But initially, on live watch, PFF has them charted as 5 pressures allowed, which is saying, I think, a lot, because Trey Hendrickson had that sack on the very first passing snap of the game as their second drive, where he got after Zion Johnson. And then really after that, it felt like the Chargers had a lot of clean pockets, which I think is part of the initial frustration for me of how they were not able to move the ball in the second half, is that they were able to pass protect at a very, very high clip. It seemed like Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater were giving them a ton of clean corners. Trey Hendrickson, again, early had a couple really, really good rushes, but then after that, outside of the one time where he drew the holding penalty, it seemed like Trey was not really a huge factor in this game. So the offensive line, I think, deserves some credit from a pass blocking perspective. Run blocking, it felt like the Bengals were a little bit too much in the backfield for my taste on the broadcast watch. But we'll see what that looks like on the tape. Did you notice anything else in particular about the way the offensive line played?
Yeah, I think I agree with you broadly speaking, right? Of like, I think the pass blocking for the most part held up. I thought that Joe Alt had another good game. Obviously, Trey Hendrickson was kind of the main guy, and he plays all of his snaps aligned over the left tackle, and so it was really
Right.
more focused on Slater this week. I thought that Slater had a good game, all things considered, against a guy that's leading the NFL in pressures and sacks and quarterback hits and everything. You know, obviously the
Yeah.
one penalty, not great, but also like if he doesn't hold Hendrickson on that play, Herbert doesn't get that ball away.
It's a
So
sack, probably. Yeah.
right. And so like you're in the same position except it's 4th and 14 instead of 3rd and 14. So I'm not like super concerned about that penalty. I think run blocking, yeah, the interior, there were a couple times where like the play just got blown up immediately. You know, there's one in particular where I don't think it was necessarily on the actual interior players that were lined up against McKinley Jackson in the fourth quarter, I want to say it was, because there's sort of a counter action that's happening where like the guard and the tight end are pulling around to the left side and just nobody blocks McKinley Jackson. And so he ends up in the backfield and Dobbins
Yeah.
kind of evades him, but still ends up losing like 2 or 3 yards. And there was a lot of that where it was just like guys were in the backfield too quickly on some of these run plays, which, you know, also contributed to them not being able to get into a rhythm on the ground. And so, you know, it's just sort of the same old with that unit. You know, I think like they performed relatively well in one area and in the other area they struggled. And, you know, we just haven't really been able to get a game where they're able to execute in both phases. And so it's just sort of you know, it's a slog, and, you know, the discourse about the interior will continue until morale improves, which will probably not be until next season. But yeah, in the meantime, you know, it's just we have what we have, right?
Yeah.
And so kind of just have to make do with what you got there.
Yeah, until they go sign, you know, Trey Smith or Ryan Kelly or somebody, we'll see what happens. But it was so Trey Pipkins got like rolled up on early in the second quarter, and like I thought he was going to go out of the game for a little bit. And there was a couple of times where Jamari actually did come into the game, and Trey was like limping around, and he gutted it out and deserves some credit for that. But outside of the Trey Hendrickson sack, I didn't feel like the interior gave up too much from a pass protection standpoint. The
Yeah.
run game, I am curious if that is where, you know, the whole Jamari thing kind of might lend itself towards an improved run game going forward. So I'm curious,
Mm-hmm.
if Trey's okay. You know, it seemed like he was able obviously to finish the game, but he might pop up back up on the injury report. So if they have to play Jamari next week, I think that could give us obviously an indication of what the offense can look like.
Yeah.
Last thing I had to touch on before we get into some of these super chats, we have 18 of them, and we really appreciated that. You guys, obviously, we have stuff to cover, but we will get to them. The Jim Harbaugh game management, it's a tough topic to touch on because 95% of what Jim Harbaugh does, it has been very, very positive for the Chargers. But to burn your challenge on the third play of the Bengals offensive day and lose that challenge, and the Chargers are out of timeouts in the first half by the beginning of the second quarter, and there's just some issues there from a game management perspective that it didn't necessarily cost them tonight, but I wish it were a little bit cleaner of an operation in that regard with Jim Harbaugh, where we've seen some questionable game management decisions this season. And again, it hasn't cost them a loss quite yet, but it's an area where I was expected better from a coach who's been in football for the bulk of his life and played quarterback in the NFL and all this stuff. So it was some puzzling decisions again today, and we've seen kind of that come to fruition like once or twice each game, I feel like.
Yeah, I think it's sort of been a continued theme. I caught a little bit of heat on Twitter when I tweeted about it like 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think it was, where
Yeah.
like it's really not been good. And you know, the challenge on the third play of the game, I will say that like watching the game live, I also didn't think that Jermaine Burton got his other foot down until like the second or third replay where you see the pellets come up. But I also don't have someone in the booth telling me whether or not I should challenge a play like Jim
Yeah.
Harbaugh is. And
Yeah.
so you would think that, you know, that person sees that and says like, okay, don't challenge this. Also, it's the third play of the game and it went for like,
Right.
it was like a 13-yard completion or something. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't, it was a big play, but it wasn't like a huge play or anything where I was
Yeah.
like, oh, like they need those yards back. And you know, then like burning a timeout on the fourth down in the first quarter later, you know, like all of that, like for as much as you can say like, okay, it didn't cost them the game this time around, right? But if you think about at the end of the half, right, where the Chargers have the ball and they get the PI penalty to get the ball down to the 1, and there's 4 seconds left, and they trot Cameron Dicker out there to kick the field goal because they didn't have any timeouts to work with on
Right.
that drive.
Right.
And so, like, if you have those timeouts and you carry them into that drive, then you have a potential opportunity where you get that play with 10, 11, 12 seconds left in the half or something. And if you want to run the ball, you still can. And if you get stuffed, you can call a timeout and trot Dicker out there anyway. And you don't have to like take the points in that situation. You can be a little bit more aggressive and try to punch the ball into the end zone. Yeah, I think that, there's certainly some stuff that I would like to be cleaned up. Obviously the challenge stuff with the whole thing upstairs is like not fully on Harbaugh. The timeout management is though. Like
100%.
the
100%.
timeout management stuff is all him. And I think that like it's been a consistent issue where like the Chargers only have 1 or 2 timeouts going into the end of a half or the end of a game or something. And like again, we've gotten very lucky that it hasn't cost the Chargers a game yet. But like in a game like this where the margins were so thin, it very well could have. And so it's something that you'd like to see get cleaned up, going forward.
Yeah, so Amanda, Tyler's sister, is in the chat. Tyler says Tressman question mark. So I can't confirm this with 100% certainty, but Mark Tressman is the game management assistant coach. He is up in the booth and he is kind of taking charge of that role. For the most part, I understand that is regarding like 4th down decisions and timeouts. But when it comes to challenges, it's basically all Harbaugh, is my understanding. Like Harbaugh is reacting to what he sees on the booth and what he sees on the board and what he sees in person. And like he does talk to people, but there's not an individual analytical staffer calling down and saying, "Hey Jim, challenge this," or "Hey Jim, go for this," or "Hey Jim, do this." Like that was the case with Brandon Staley, who was obviously very analytically inclined. So the Chargers do not have an analytics staffer linking up with Jim Harbaugh during the game. That is a big change, obviously, from what we've seen previously. And the Chargers are not the only team that does not have an analytical staffer calling games. There's still obviously a lot of resistance with analytics, and Harbaugh is a fan of analytics when it comes to like in-game data and when it comes to 4th down decision makings, and like it's not a part of their program, but there is not a staffer calling down saying, "Hey, you got to challenge this. Like we saw this, whatever." So that is a bit of a change for those who are wondering. Again, if I'm wrong on that, like people can come out and correct me, but I'm from my understanding of what the Chargers have said publicly and what I have heard behind the scenes and asked people, that is kind of the case. So Tressman is kind of doing it on his own with Jim Harbaugh.
Yep.
At the end of the day, it's a little thing that hasn't really cost them a whole lot, and Jim Harbaugh is mostly doing a ton of positive things for the Chargers, but it's an issue for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, Alex, did you have any other thoughts, any other standouts before we jump into these super chats?
No, I think we can get into it.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so first one from before we even started, back from Steven Nava. He says the choking is over. Also, DJ was recruiting after the game. Come on over, Higgins. We got a jersey waiting for you. I drove over from my in-laws like right after the game, so I didn't see if that happened or not. But listen, man, T. Higgins is welcome to come over. We'll cross that bridge when we get there, I think. But I appreciate the super chat from Steven.
Yeah, I very much think that we will cross that bridge when it comes this offseason, but we could talk about it more then.
Yeah, the Bengals obviously cannot afford to keep him. They haven't even paid Jamar yet, so we'll see what happens there. Austin Smith says, meant to say this on many of the lives this year, but where would they be without Ladd? Ortiz cooked something fierce, and then he says, BTFU.
Yeah, real, true.
The truth. Ladd is the truth for sure.
Yeah.
The game where he was not fully healthy, obviously the Cardinals game, I think it's a real telling sign that game is the one where they really struggled to finish drives and get into touchdown situations. So Ladd is obviously extremely important to what the passing game is doing and what Justin Herbert is able to do on a down-to-down basis. And we saw that in the fourth quarter tonight.
Yep.
Another T. Higgins question. Okay. Ryan Parsons, big win. Let's go
Okay.
Bolts. Off topic, but that game had me thinking about T. Higgins on Chargers next year. Thoughts on him joining during free agency. He's a great player. And I wouldn't put it past the Chargers to be able to sign him. But if you're T. Higgins, I don't know if you're going to want to sign up to play for this kind of stylistic offense when the Bengals passed 55 times tonight and the Chargers passed like 29. So I don't know. I think some of it is a tough sell. Some of it is not a tough sell for T. Higgins. And I don't know if I see the Chargers spending $30 million on T. Higgins when they could probably go sign somebody for 15 and then also an offensive lineman for 15 and then kind of call it a wash.
Yeah, I think that the issue, right, is that if you look at sort of the way that Joe Ortiz has built teams in Baltimore, Baltimore has also sort of had this problem for the last like half a decade, really since Lamar Jackson got there, where like they don't have a true number one receiver, and every year the Ravens fans beg them to go out and sign somebody, and they refuse to do it every year because it's just like not part of their philosophy for whatever reason. And I think, especially with the way that the offense is constructed right now, I think that Herbert did get all the way up to like 36 attempts by the end of the game. Okay. But, Burrow still threw the ball 50 times. There's also just like the Chargers are not going to be short on money, but also T. Higgins is going to go wherever gives him the most money. And that's going to be what happens. Like that's long story short, that's going to be what happens is he's going to go wherever pays him the most money. Is that going to be the Chargers? It could be, but it could also very well not be.
Yeah, I think a certain team in Florida that's going to have a lot of cap space, and his college quarterback probably could be a well-suited place for him. So, I think listen, he's a great player. I think I think he's a wide receiver one on probably 20 teams in the NFL. I just don't know if the Chargers stylistically match up, front office wise. I don't know if that's the priority. Like the Chargers are going to have a ton of cap space, but they're going to have a Rashawn Slater extension to work out, a Khalil Mack extension to work out, Poona Ford, Christian Fulton, all these guys that have played well that deserve to come back. Plus, they need a starting center, they need a right guard, et cetera, et cetera. So they have space, yes, but they also have holes that they need to figure out long term. And spending $30 million of your cap space, and it doesn't work out exactly like that. But from their standpoint, would I rather have T at, let's say, $35 million, or would I rather have a starting right guard, Khalil, the Rashawn extension, and then another receiver at $10 million for the same price? I think the Chargers are going to go for the quantity of players instead of star chasing, because that, like you mentioned, that's kind of been how the Ravens have done. They very rarely go all in on a star player. They usually have signed 4 or 5 guys instead to equal that one player in free agency. Joe Alexander in here. Maybe I am brainwashed by the Harbaugh effect, but I was not worried at all the whole time. Truly impressive from our boys. Bolt the F up. We talked about this earlier. When Justin Herbert fumbled, I thought the game was over. I was like, I was in my chair. My head was on my head. Like I couldn't believe what was happening. My Brooke was doing the same thing. And my mother-in-law was like, what are you doing? Like, there's still plenty of time left. And I'm like, you don't understand what we have seen over the last 6 years, so props to you, man. If you felt that way, I did not. I was very much stressed out about this one after that fumble.
Yeah, you are a stronger man than me if you were not this game at all the whole time. That's awesome for you. I was very concerned.
I need some of that energy in my own life because I was very concerned.
If you can like teach us how to do that, that'd be great. That'd be awesome.
As Jim Harbaugh would say, you are a beast, and we are lesser men for doubting him. I guess is what we can say there. So I appreciate the super chat from Joe in here. Next one from Adam. He says, at what point do we buy Hart/Still jerseys? Again, we saw Tariq Still have, I think, an up and down performance, but he had a couple of super crucial plays. Obviously, the pass breakup And then Cam Hart, it's a real bummer that he got injured because I thought he was really putting out some quality tape for the Chargers again, as he has over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think it's getting close to that time. If you are in the market for a new jersey, I think it's getting close.
Do you have jerseys? Are you a jersey guy?
I have a Herbert jersey, and I have a Derwin jersey from when he got drafted. So it's like the old one with his old
Nice.
number and everything.
Nice.
But I haven't picked up any new ones since I got the Herbert one. But
Yeah,
we'll see. Maybe I'm in the market. Maybe I'm who I'm talking about.
yeah, yeah. I'm obviously older than you are, so my outlook on jerseys has changed quite a bit. I don't love wearing them, so I have a hard time like justifying like I'm gonna go buy this jersey. I do need I don't. Justin Herbert is the only current jersey I have. That's like I said, current. So I have a yellow 33 Derwin James. Those ones I actually really liked wearing. They're like the softer, lighter material. The legends, I think they're called. But the only like current jersey I have is a Justin Herbert Vapor jersey. So I've been debating about getting a Khalil Mack jersey because he's older than me. Like that's the justification for me. It's like
there you go. Yeah.
Like me personally, I don't know, man. Like Joe Alt is 21. Like I that's probably who I would get is Joe or Rashawn, but those guys are much younger than me. So I don't know. I'll probably end up choosing Khalil if I do end up getting another one.
Yeah, I think Khalil's a good one too. Though that's definitely going to be in the running if I get another one.
Yeah. Yeah. And he better be back next year.
Yes. Yeah, for real.
Yeah. It was great to see him on the sideline also, by the way. And he was in it. He had the headset on and he was like, he was super involved. So I love seeing that. Hopefully he can be back next week against the Ravens. Mr. Sarl in here with a big super chat. He says it's 6 a.m. This was also an hour ago in Denmark. Can't sleep after this. Not the same old Chargers or lucky with the missed field goals. What are your thoughts there?
I think a little bit of both. Definitely got a little bit lucky, but I think also getting a little bit lucky is sort of indicative about not being the same old Chargers. Like we've talked about in games like this, it seems like everything sort of goes against the Chargers. Normally, they're the ones missing those field goals. Like we talked about with Justin's fumble and everything like that, like it really didn't feel like they were going to pull it out. And then, for them to do that, I think is indicative that, again, like they maybe are not the same old Chargers, but also, always a little bit of luck involved when you have a one possession win.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both here. I do think they are very fortunate that the Bengals do not have a reliable kicker past 50 yards. That's part of the game, right? Like you obviously wrote your article for SB Nation. Like this is kind of the golden age of kickers, and if you don't have one, you're the Bengals tonight. So if the Bengals had Cameron Dicker, they probably win this game. So it's just you play the game as it happens out on the field, and if the Chargers had missed field goals, the Bengals would be having the same kind of conversation. So it definitely helped their cause, but at the same time, they still had to go and convert on that last drive. They still had to go out and make the plays and go score a touchdown, and so they deserve a lot of credit for taking advantage of the script that was given them. But the script was a favorable script at the end of the game.
Yep, for sure.
Wow, it's international fever here tonight from Mitchell, bolting up so hard right now in Adelaide, South Australia. Shout out to our guys, the Thunder Down Under podcast. They do great work down there. I'm sure Mitchell is listening to him, and if you guys are not, definitely encourage that. He says the team is different this year. No more chargering. I think we've covered this a bit, but it does seem like things are changing. And NSN has a similar sentiment: the Harbaugh blessing greater than the Charger curse.
Yep. I think we're well on our way. I think it's definitely a good win, and to get it the way that they did, I think we've talked about is really refreshing for this team.
Yeah. Christian says that you all owe an apology for trashing Greg Roman and the offense. I've been saying this scheme and philosophy works. What are your thoughts about the way that Greg Roman called this game tonight?
I mean, I would say that the first half of the game was a pretty stark deviation from the way that they have called games all season, because they came out firing. They came out, Justin Herbert is a super pass heavy script. We haven't really seen that since the Denver game, I think it was, where they came out and they really just came out and had Herbert drop back and throw. but it's not really been like what they've leaned on. I think that obviously Justin seemed like he was maybe a little bit extra motivated to start the game or something, with the way he played in the first half. And so you want to roll with that hot hand, right? But then, like we talked about a little bit in the second half, I think that they kind of got away from the things that were working. I think certainly the philosophy has been working, and I think that that is sort of a trickle down effect from all levels of the staff, right? Where the philosophy of just like committing to the run and playing strong defense and everything, like that's always been the backbone of a championship contending team. That's going to continue to be the backbone of a championship contending team for as long as football is played, right? That like those are going to be the things that you have to do in order to win a championship. And so in that sense, yeah, absolutely, that philosophy is working. But I think that there were still some things that I wasn't super stoked about as far as like the play calling and everything, especially in the second half.
Yeah.
And yeah, in the first half, I think that it was different than what we've seen this season, and that's a positive development. And I do think that we should recognize that like it's good that they're giving Justin more freedom to do that. That's a good thing objectively, but it was also the first game in a while that we've seen them do that.
Yeah, I think he does deserve credit for some of the changes that they've made just from a bones of the offense standpoint. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be like the biggest Greg Roman expert, but after the Chargers made that hiring official, I went back and watched a lot of Ravens tape from previous games, and the passing game has definitely not been a super high positive for Greg Roman in the past, and I think run game wise, there's a lot of sequencing of events for him. Pass game wise, it doesn't really share that same kind of ability, right? And this year, I think we're seeing an improvement in that regard. I think some of the RPO actions that they're able to do, some of the play action concepts that they're able to do are real strengths of this football team. But they've got to lean more into that. Like they do kind of have a tendency to get away from play action at times. I think that does show up. It showed up tonight in the second half. My issues with Greg Roman have never been this year. It's like 2 years from now. What does this look like? Does next year, is there a step up from this? Is there a step up from this in year 3? Because that was never really, it never really felt like that was the case in Baltimore. It felt like it was the year 1 offense every single year. And that's kind of been his critique for the most of his career. And so that's where I've been a little wary of the Greg Roman experience, is like, what does this actually look like with time to expand with Justin Herbert going forward? And so we can't answer that question right now. But his job coming in was to raise the floor of the Chargers offense, and it's been a little bumpy, but I think the Chargers are on the right track in that regard.
Yeah, definitely agree there.
Richard in here next says he hates the number 27. LOL, broke the Tyler curse. So, if you hate the number 27, obviously J.K. Dobbins wears number 27, and he kind of ended that. So, was that the same score as, was it 27-3 was the Jaguars game? I'm guessing.
Oh, I think it must have been. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it was.
Yeah. So, I get that. That's a rough one. 27-6, I guess, is different than 27-3. I don't know.
Yeah, true.
Melly in here says that Fulton was making a lot of mistakes. Luckily, he made a play at the end. Miss Mac also and bolt up. I thought Christian Fulton, we talked about him a little bit earlier. I thought he overcame the mistakes and played really well in the fourth quarter there. Had a couple of really key plays on T. Higgins, the pass breakup on Jamar Chase in the end zone. So I up and down performance, but we also haven't really seen him be tested like this today either. So, we'll see how he's able to respond going forward.
Yeah, like you said, we talked about it a little bit. I think that didn't necessarily trust the hamstring coming back. I think he was still limited in practice this week with it too. So I think some of that is to be expected, as far as the penalties and sort of like the grabbiness and everything. But I thought he played really well in the fourth quarter, especially when they asked him to sort of step up and be the guy that was covering either Higgins or Chase one-on-one, kind of on the opposite side of where they were running that bracket coverage.
Mm-hmm.
He did really well with that, and I was overall happy with how he played. Again, first game back from injury, not going to expect a like stellar performance, especially against this receiving core. But I thought, all things considered, he played pretty well.
Yeah, hopefully next week is a little bit more consistent for him.
Yep.
We'll zoom through some of these because we're about an hour in at this point. We do really appreciate all of the super chats here. Rich, just with a simple W, we appreciate that. The Fit Freestyle Kid says the Chargers just chiefed the heck out of this game. I love that, actually, the way that you frame that. The Chiefs have been doing this for basically all season and all of last season, except for today against the Bills. But I love the way that Fit Freestyle Kid framed that one.
Yeah, definitely.
NSN wants to know why the blitz call on the Bengals' first touchdown. What did you make of? So it's 4th and goal from the 6, and the Chargers end up going cover 0 against Jamar Chase. What are your thoughts about how that play kind of unfolded?
Yeah, I think that you are probably not expecting an in-breaking route on that play is probably what's happening, right? Is that Chase is kind of isolated on the outside against Cam Hart there, and you're probably expecting that to be a fade or, some sort of route that's going to be in the corner of the end zone, not something that breaks in. I think that the Bengals probably made a good adjustment, probably saw the look and checked into that play to get Chase on more of an in-breaking route, or maybe they had it called the whole way. I don't know. But either way, I think that I'm fine with the call in general. I think that obviously bringing pressure against Burrow was what was working sort of all game, not even just in that first half. And so I think that from that perspective, I didn't mind it a ton. But I think just in simple terms, you're not expecting an in-breaking route there, probably, is what I would imagine from the Chargers perspective.
Yeah, with the way that Cam Hart was kind of off there, I think I'll be curious to go watch the all 22 there, but it seemed like he was also kind of expecting an out route or a go or a fade route or something like that. So
yeah,
Jesse Minter knows way more football than all of us. He's one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. I feel like that's established. So he there was probably something that he saw on tape based off of that personnel package that cemented that he would want to cover 0 in that kind of situation. And maybe the Bengals just made a play, right? Maybe it was just a simple little audible that they were not ready for, like Alex mentioned. So I think if you're going to make that call, I would like to see Cam Hart up in press coverage and give him the chance to disrupt the route a little bit more.
definitely.
That's kind of the main adjustment for me that I would like to see on that play.
Yeah, for sure.
Joe back again. I also think we earned a close win like this after kicking butt the last month. It's great to get a win and still have stuff to work on.
Yeah, definitely agree. Getting a win like this against a much better opponent than sort of the quality that the Chargers have been playing the last few weeks, I think is big for them.
Yeah, I agree. Ismael says Evan McPherson is getting his next paycheck. And also, I believe this game cemented the passing of the torch from Keenan to Ladd McConkey. I think Ladd has been the guy that Justin has gone to in clutch situations for several weeks now, but I think it coming in this specific fashion in this kind of moment definitely cements Ladd's status as the go-to situation, third downs, got to have it clutch situations. At some point, the Chargers are going to play a defense who are going to key in on Ladd in those moments, and it'll be interesting to see what the kind of counterpunch is there. But yes, this was obviously a prime time game-winning drive. To have Ladd McConkey go out and do that is huge for his kind of national status, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that we're on our way there to him being the primary third down, gotta have it no matter what the coverage is sort of guy. I think right now we sort of talked about with the man coverage looks like it's always going to be there. I think you've seen a lot of Will Dissly when it's zone on those third downs right now, just because a lot of those routes that they're scheming up for him are open. And so I think we're well on our way. We're going to get there. I'm really optimistic about the way that Ladd has looked.
Yeah. I think heading into tonight, he was on pace for a little over 900 yards. So if he's able to string together a couple more 100-yard performances like tonight, he'll have a real chance to hit 1,000-yard season, which I think even the most optimistic of Ladd McConkey fans probably did not see that coming, unless your name is Chase Daniel, who thought that Ladd was going to he thought that Ladd was going to catch 100 passes. So he saw a much higher season than I think anybody else out there.
Good for him.
Good for him, I guess. He's on pace for 100 targets right now.
Yeah.
So I guess that part, if you want to be technical, is true. NSN, why is Palmer on the team? Such a no-show always. I think that's a little unfair of of an assessment of Joshua Palmer. He had a rough drop tonight, 100%. But he's also made some crucial plays for this team in the past, and even this season he's had a couple of clutch moments as well. So it was not a great Joshua Palmer game, but he's a solid wide receiver 3 for them. I don't understand this kind of criticism personally.
Yeah, I mean, he had a really nice catch, really nice contested catch for a first down in this game. I think that he is sort of like when everything is congested and there's no one to throw to, it feels like Herbert looks to him most often because he trusts him in those contested catch situations most frequently, especially along the sideline. And I think that he's done fairly well in that role. Again, as we talked about earlier, we're spoiled with the Mike Williams experience. Not every receiver along the sideline is going to look like Mike Williams. Most of those opportunities that Mike Williams was turning into 80-20 balls are 50-50 balls. And so when you take a step to Joshua Palmer on those plays, there's going to be more of those that get knocked away and more of those that don't turn into completions because he's not Mike Williams, who is a very special NFL player. But yeah, I think that he's done fine. He's a good wide receiver 3. I think that, there's not going to be an urgency to re-sign him in free agency this offseason, I don't think. I think he's certainly a replaceable player, but I don't think that he needs to be like a healthy scratch or anything like going forward for the rest of this season or anything like that.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I maybe he gets re-signed, but it'll be a modest contract at best.
It'd be small. Yeah.
Buffalo Boys with a super sticker in here. Appreciate that very much. LA Chargers fan got his first win in person. Shout out to him and to Tyler.
Maybe you were the curse.
We had someone in the chat yesterday that said they were like 0-9, I think, in person. And I was like, if that were the case, I would probably after like 0-5, I'd be like, yeah, I'm not really going to go to any more games.
Yeah, I'd be like, okay, you know what? Clearly I am the problem.
Yeah. So congratulations to LA Chargers fan. I'm glad you got to see that one in person. Primetime wins probably feel a little bit different too. So I'm sure there was a little extra buzz for that one. From Adelaide, Daniel Steer here. He wants to know why J.K. Dobbins didn't go down at the very end. Obviously scoring the touchdown and then did give the Bengals a chance at a Hail Mary. I have my thoughts here, but what are your thoughts about JK not going down like most people kind of assume that you should do?
Yeah, I did have the same question, I will say, initially, like kind of on live watch, where I think that with the way that the game was going and with the sort of the emotional way that the game was going, it felt like if you gave the Bengals any more time, they were totally just going to drive down the field and tie it back up or win if you go down and you kick that field goal, or forced into kicking that field goal with time left. Excuse me. But I think that ultimately, like, there was little enough time left in the game, and the Chargers defense had performed well enough on those 2 or 3 drives beforehand that I think that you were probably more confident in, okay, let's just deliver the dagger, make it a 7-point game, back them up and force them to drive, the full length of the field on what's going to be 20 seconds or less. I do also think that after a certain point, he was a little bit too close to the sideline where it was going to be a little bit too easy potentially. Like if he did slow up for a Bengals defender to push him out of bounds and stop the clock. So I think that might have been part of it as well. But I totally get the questioning of it. Like I said, I had the same question myself, but I think that it probably just went into, let's just get the dagger. There's so little time left and we trust the defense.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that is running through JK's head, right? I'm sure the Chargers, like from a coaching standpoint, were saying like, hey, like we're just gonna run this clock out. Let's get a few more yards. We have the 1 timeout still, I believe. And we can, get Cameron Dicker out there and ice the game. But I think once JK kind of broke it to like it was a 15-yard gain, he probably saw daylight and was like, I'm just going to go score.
Yeah.
And for JK, right, like I don't blame him, man. I mean, his career was essentially over at this time last year. Like he's coming off of all of these injuries. So if you're him, like go get that walk-off moment, man. I don't blame him at all. We have seen him do the go down thing previously in other games. So like he knows it's a thing. And I just think JK has kind of earned that trust where if he sees daylight and he wants to go get that touchdown, like I'm not gonna gripe about this. And I think he's kind of earned that right so far this season. He's on pace to hit 1,000 yards pretty easily, and the run game hasn't been like super efficient by any means. But the Chargers haven't had 1,000-yard rusher since like 2017 Melvin Gordon, and J.K. Dobbins is going to do that in his first year back with the Chargers. So I think it's just been more positive than not. And if he wanted to go get that walk-off moment, by all means, go get it and make sure you're going to score the touchdown.
Right.
And he was able
Yeah.
to do that, but I don't blame him by any means.
Yeah, totally.
Don Cheto says that he was there live in section 126. The crowd was electric. It did sound like a great atmosphere on TV. Definitely felt like the Chargers crowd influenced things. There were a couple moments where the Bengals fans that were there, you heard a couple like who day chats, but overall it was overwhelmingly Chargers crowd, which is great to see. And hopefully it continues to build from here. We did talk about the Justin Herbert fumble and Quentin a bit. And he says, P.S. Lad for president. So I don't know if you have anything to address there, but shout out to Don Cheto.
Yeah, I think the Justin fumble is one where you probably want to see him go down there instead of like trying to fight through that defender. I get that like it was a hot rushing game for him, and so he was probably feeling himself a little bit. And you see a DB, and you're Justin Herbert, and you're 6'6", and can run over that guy. But I think that's probably one where like you'd prefer maybe to see him skirt around that guy and go out of bounds or get down or something instead of risking that play. But I think that Herbert's a smart guy. He'll learn from that, and I think that like we will probably not see that happen again.
Yes, it felt like almost like a heat check, almost like where he's just been
totally.
kind of feeling himself a little bit on the ground, and just an unfortunate kind of circumstance. And he did say after the game that he knows better and he needs to protect the football a little bit more. And I can't remember the last time he fumbled on a scramble before today, so I think that obviously says a lot about who he is as a player. And this is not like a Daniel Jones situation where we have to worry about like a fumble thing. This was his second turnover all season. So he generally is very turnover averse, and we'll see him get back to that going forward.
Yep, totally.
Buffalo Boy says, drop QJ and get someone who can be a clutch wide receiver one. Sir, they have a clutch wide receiver one. His name is Lad McConkey. And I feel like we talked about Quentin a lot. There's no real point in dropping him. Like, he's their wide receiver 3. And up until tonight, he's been pretty solid and definitely has improved a lot from last year.
He has 6 touchdowns this season.
Yeah.
Games. Like, I don't know. I feel like he's been pretty good. I think that like, I know that people are still, not necessarily super happy with the pick 2 years ago, especially with the way that he looked last year. And so it's going to be an uphill battle for him to sort of win that trust back. But like, he's been perfectly fine for the Chargers this season. I think, they're like, again, are there some moments where like you'd like to see him come down with a catch and you'd like to see him make a play? Sure, absolutely. But again, like with some of those that we talked about, like if he goes and makes that play, it's an outstanding NFL play. Like it's not like it's routine plays that he's missing like he was last year, right? And so I think his improvement has been super evident this season. I think that he has been a underratedly big reason why the Chargers offense has been able to perform the way that it has. And, I think he's been fine.
Yeah, he's been fine, and he's been their wide receiver 2 on the season. Like those statements are significant improvements of what we thought coming into the season, where we were kind of wondering, okay, maybe DJ Chark is your wide receiver 2, maybe it's Joshua Palmer, maybe they just kind of rotate wide receiver 1 duties. We had no idea what this receiver room was going to look like. Now, 11 weeks into the season, Quentin has established himself. He is your wide receiver 2. Jalen Reagor has passed DJ Chark on the depth chart, which we haven't really talked about a lot tonight. But Quentin has been solid, and that again is a significant improvement. His advanced numbers look good. He's like middle of the pack in ESPN's open score. His yards per route run is kind of hovered around 2 yards per route, which is a pretty good, solid number. So he's it was not a great performance tonight, and I think we can criticize tonight. But
Yeah.
overall on the season, Quentin has been very, very solid. He's scored touchdowns in 3 straight weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And so the Chargers, I think, trust him, and Justin trusts him a lot more. And so he's been fine. And going forward, I think it's fair to assume that he takes another step next offseason as well.
Yep, totally.
Sebastian Oriana, he says, thank you for always pronouncing my name right. No problem. I totally understand the frustration there as someone who has the last name that's be kind of difficult. He wants to know, if you're a GM and you're on the clock and the best tight end and wide receiver are available, who do you get? I think my take on this is that this offense needs like a high-end pass catching tight end to really function at its greatest heights. And we've seen that obviously with Mark Andrews in Baltimore. We've seen that with Colston Loveland in Michigan, even Jake Butt at Michigan, Vernon Davis in San Francisco, all of those Stanford tight ends. They need like a true tight end one kind of option. And not to say that that guy has to be like a Travis Kelce level player, but even somebody like a Sam Laporta would be huge for this kind of offense. You know, a Dalton Kincaid, a Brock Bowers, like that kind of level of player is probably not walking through the door this year. But I think tight end is going to take a high priority early in the draft in April, because they have to get a true like long-term option in there. Because Will Dissly, it's super cool to see what he's doing, but that's not a guy that should be leading your team in tight end targets, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I think even like you're looking for like even like an Isaiah Likely caliber of player,
Yeah.
like a Trey McBride caliber of player, the way that he's played in Arizona this season, like someone like that is going to be a consistent, reliable option in the passing game. Obviously, they've gotten some production in that respect out of Disley, but again, if you sort of think about like the way that the Ravens front office has been structured and the way that they've built those teams before Ortiz came over to the Chargers, you think about the way that Harbaugh's offenses have functioned, even going back to like 2012 Stanford with Kobe Fleener, like that
Yes.
is going to be the engine of this offense. Like,
Yeah.
regardless of who the offensive coordinator is, even if you remove Greg Roman from the equation, that's what Jim Harbaugh wants to do with this
Right.
team. And so I think a high-end tight end is definitely going to be high on the list of items. And also in this draft class, the tight end class is better than the wide receiver class. So if you're asking specifically about this year, I'd probably pick a tight end.
Yeah, great question to have Alex on for that. Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland initially? What are your thoughts there? Because there's been a lot of Colston Loveland falling takes recently
Yeah.
on Twitter.
Yeah, it's the classic we come into the season with a guy who's the consensus number one player at a position, and then he plays for a team that is bad. And so you kind of have the combination of the nitpickiness of people are getting sort of tired of talking about him all the time, and also he's on a team that's bad and his quarterback can't throw him the ball. But
And
also
they've had
Tyler
like
Warren,
5 quarterbacks this year. It's
yeah,
been
and they're on
rough.
like, yeah, they're fourth or fifth guy of the year. But also Tyler Warren has been incredible. Like he's been outstanding, and the reasons that he wasn't like at that level last year have nothing to do with him. It has more to do with the fact that like there were 2 guys on the depth chart ahead of him the last 2 or 3 years that are also now NFL
Yeah.
starting tight ends.
Like Theo
And
Johnson's been an awesome player for the Giants so
right,
far this year.
exactly. And even before that, like Brenton Strange was the main tight end at Penn State, and he
Yeah.
played a pretty big role for the Jaguars now. And so, it's gonna be close. I think initial thoughts, I do really like Tyler Warren. I sort of lean that way. I think that he's a better. It's kind of backwards to say almost, because obviously Loveland played for Harbaugh, but I think that Warren is probably a better scheme fit because he's a better run
He's
blocker.
bigger, right?
Yeah, and he's bigger. And so a little bit more to add in that regard. So I think that'll be the way that I lean, but still a long way to go.
Yeah, still a long way to go. But Tyler Warren taking wildcat snaps for like 50-yard gains is,
Yeah.
it's mighty enticing to watch for
Oh, yeah.
sure.
Oh, yeah.
Next one here from NSN. Better to draft an elite wide receiver and have cheap rookie deal than pay yet another expensive guy. Rookie wide receiver contracts, I think, are going to be they're going to start to become similar to like the quarterback contract value, because T Higgins could go for like 38, close to $40 million next offseason based off of the way that group has kind of gone. I mean, Jamar Chase is going to reset the market, and it's just going to keep going and going and going. So, if you can hit on a guy like Ladd, and Ladd is your wide receiver one, making $1 million a year versus 35, it's a pretty big cheat code nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. I think like if the conversation specifically is about like, oh, should we sign T. Higgins or should we just draft a guy in the first round this year, right? Then like, yeah, like obviously, ideally, you would always just be able to draft T. Higgins caliber players,
Right.
but
Yeah.
like it's sort of the old adage of like, do you want the boat or the mystery box? Like the mystery box could even be a boat,
Yeah.
right? Like the draft pick could even be T. Higgins.
Yeah.
And so, it's one of those things where like I think the Chargers are in a spot salary cap wise right now where they can pay for a big splash guy if they want to and just
Sure.
take the sure thing and, grab some building blocks around Justin Herbert and build this team out the way that, they want to have it vision wise for Jim Harbaugh. But as you get into more of a like year over year contending situation, like the Chiefs are in and like the Ravens are in, like you're gonna have to rely on drafting and developing more frequently.
Yeah.
And so long term, it is better to do that. But this offseason, it may be better for the Chargers to make a splash,
Yeah. Yeah. They'll have to weigh that. The tight end free agency group isn't very deep. I mean, tight ends these days are like
Yeah.
tight ends very rarely hit the trade market. They very rarely hit the open free agent market. It's kind of a position that teams really try and hold on to.
Yeah,
So
for
it
sure.
is much more feasible for them to get an upgrade at wide receiver in free agency than it is tight end. So
Yeah, definitely.
that is definitely part of the calculus for sure. Gary wants to know, with Thule playing the way that he's playing, are you feeling better about the Bosa situation next year?
Absolutely. Totally. I think that there's still some consistency stuff with Tulu that you kind of want to see. Obviously, like last year, he got off to the super fast start and then kind of slowed down over the second half of the year. This year, kind of slow to start the year and then has picked it up over the last month. Kind of want to see him put together that full season, but also like he's not being
Yeah.
asked to play a full role most of the time. Like
Right.
when Khalil and Joey are both healthy. And so, how much of that is just that he's not being asked to do it? You don't know until you give him those reps. And so, I definitely, I think you definitely feel better about it for sure.
Yeah.
I will say too that like Joey played pretty well today, like so
Yeah.
with the way that Joey looked, I feel better about the Joey situation. But definitely
Yeah.
with the way that Tuli played, you feel better about it.
Yeah, Joey did play pretty well today on broadcast watch. I'm excited to see what he looked like on tape, but I just his contract, his situation is not really tenable for this team. Like they're gonna
Yeah.
look at that cap charge and the
Yeah.
missed games, and you understand, right? Like the Chargers coming into a new situation, you want to see what you have in Joey because maybe they view Joey as like the highest ceiling of like the big four from the offseason, and I don't necessarily disagree with that take, if that's what they were thinking, but now like you see the three separate injuries that he's dealt with this season, and he still is not fully 100% healthy, into week 12. It contractually, it doesn't make really any sense for this Chargers team to keep him.
Yeah.
If he wants to
Not at
come
that
back
number, certainly.
right, right. If he wants to come back at a significantly lower number, I think the Chargers can have that conversation similar to how they did with Mike Williams. But I just, financially speaking, there's no real upside in keeping him when you can free up enough space to go get $100 million in cap space. It's a pretty big chunk. And so I think that story is kind of written already, and we'll kind of see what happens there. But Thule played awesome today. He's been an absolute heater over the last month. I love the fact that he looked at his bad game against the Cardinals and was like, fuck that. Like, I'm just going to go be an awesome football player now. So I love Thule. He plays great. He does all the little things. Even though he's their edge one right now, he was still playing kickoff and punt team and doing all the special team stuff. So he's the kind of player that you need on every team. And it's been a treat to watch.
Yep.
Kyle Loomis says checking in from Plano, Texas. Great first half. Had some 22 vibes there that we could have done without, but happy to see them walk away without the dub. I think we did cover that quite a bit, so we feel the same. Joe was not nervous. The rest of us, I think, were very nervous. But appreciate the super chat there from Kyle. Colin says, great win. Happy to be celebrating with the GAT crew. Appreciate Colin in here as well. Again, he was here yesterday, so it was good to see him back. Christian Hernandez says, next week will be a big test. Defense will need to be very physical. If Chiefs slip up one more week, we can be playing them for the division, by the way. A little peek ahead, I guess, from Christian.
True. That is true. It's not a super hard schedule for the Chiefs the next couple of weeks until the Chargers game, but anything can happen. I mean, they almost lost to the Broncos, so anything is possible.
Yeah. The Broncos like crushed the Falcons today.
Yeah.
Super weird. I cannot figure out the Atlanta Falcons. I have no idea what to make.
Very, very odd team. That game is going to be so weird. The Chargers Falcons game.
Yes.
Yeah.
That being said, the Chiefs play the Panthers and the Raiders next week. Next 2 weeks.
That's correct.
They're going to win those 2 games.
The Raiders beat the Ravens, Come on.
That was a long time ago. I mean, the Raiders have started and benched Gardner Minshew like 7 different times since that point.
That's true. Maybe Desmond Ridder will be able to beat the Chiefs in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So then it's Chargers in week 14. And then they play the Browns, the Texans, the Steelers, and then the Broncos. So their
last 3 weeks probably work out pretty well for the Chargers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think either way, like if the Chiefs beat the Texans, it's probably not the worst thing in the world for the Chargers.
Yeah.
Obviously, if they beat the Broncos, that's great for seeding purposes, but we'll see. If the Chargers can beat the Chiefs, then we're going to know a lot more about this team going forward. But I am still obviously a little bit pessimistic about that matchup.
Yeah. Let's focus on the Ravens first, maybe.
Yeah. Big game this week. And the defense will definitely need to be physical.
Yeah.
Derrick Henry has scored a touchdown every single game this season.
Yep.
He's on pace for like 25 touchdowns and 2,000 yards at age 33. Like, it's just crazy. And then our last one here from the Z Show. This game took a year off my life, but it was worth it. Bolt up an awesome show, fellas. We do appreciate the support there, and it definitely took some time off our lives as well.
Only a year is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I said 5.
Yeah.
I said at least 5.
Yeah.
Between this game and the Jaguars game, that's 10 years gone off of my life, and I think everybody else should feel the same.
Yeah, if not more.
If not more. All right. Was not expecting an hour and a half in here, but you guys are sent in a ton of super chats. We greatly appreciate that. Very grateful to have Alex in here with me tonight. Tyler and I will be back on Tuesday for our film review. Hopefully everybody that was at the game made it home safe. Alex, any final thoughts before we head out?
No. Good win.
Winning is fun. Winning is way more fun.
Yeah, winning is fun. It's crazy how much more fun it is doing the show when the team is good.
Yes. After that Justin Herbert fumble, we messaged all of like in our group chat, and we were like, "What the fuck? We're gonna have to do this game after a loss? Like, are you kidding me?
Oh God, this is gonna be awful."
So shout out to Justin Herbert, Lad McConkey, and J.K. Dobbins for rescuing this win. It was much more fun tonight to do this after a win. Hopefully next Monday night we can do it after another big win, because Tyler will be at that game too. So maybe Tyler can experience 2 big wins in a row at SoFi Stadium. That would obviously be wonderful. All right, so that's going to do it for us tonight. Make sure and check out Alex's video later this week with Katzen's Corner. I'm pretty sure Alex Insdorf will have a Bolt breakdowns tomorrow, and then we'll be back on Tuesday for our film review. So appreciate you guys so much for tuning in. We had a great time tonight. Hopefully you did as well. That's going to do it for us tonight. This has been the Guilty as Charged podcast. As always, Bolt up.